puedes ir pasando a Josh también. Ya lo compartí.
Good evening. My name is Veronika Krausas. I am so thrilled to be here tonight with three supremely amazing people. The wealth of creativity and expertise between these three is quite astounding. So first of all, Andres Jaramillo.
Yes, perfect.
I've been practicing. Amazing pianist who is the Leonardstein resident artist this year with Piano Spheres. A graduate of USC, where I teach as well, so of course that makes him amazing. No. Just a commonality. Will be performing a concert of Colombian music. And the two composers we have with us are Paola Marquez and Josh Rodriguez. Both of whom have world premieres today. So I know we have Andres for approximately half an hour because I promised that we would send him backstage so he could get ready for the concert. I'm going to just start with a question for you. How did this concert come about? What was the genesis for the idea behind your work, your concert?
I love your question and that you use the word genesis, because genesis also implies disorder and chaos before the creation. I always had this idea to make a recital of living composers. And during my doctoral program and my master's, and since I moved with my wife and my kids to the United States, I wanted to do it, but I didn't have time. I had to fulfill some requirements as part of my degrees to play from Bach to Schoenberg. And I start feeling myself an immigrant, truly, 2 years ago. Before that, I was so immersed as a student, as a professor, that I didn't face. And there were some situations as a family, some change of status, some things that made me feel immigrant. Could you hear me there? Okay. And it made me feel immigrant, vulnerable. And a lot of things that we're going to describe later through the music and with the composers. So, a friend of mine who is also a Mexican composer, Juan Pablo Contreras, a good friend, he said, Andres, I want to put you in contact with Piano Spheres. So I didn't know what was Piano Spheres, and this is embarrassing. And then when I found out that one of the missions of Piano Spheres, I connected immediately with my original idea in the middle of the chaos to do something about immigration. And beyond any political flag, as an immigrant myself, with my family, as a concert pianist, as a Colombian, I thought, and I talked to Piano Spheres, I got awarded with this amazing recognition to be the Leonardstein resident. And I remember Jeff, the executive director, asking me, what would you like to do in one of the interviews? And I said, I would like to do a Journey of Immigrants. A whole recital that every composer is or was an immigrant, and a few world premieres.
And how do the three of you know each other? How did you pick your composers?
Okay, with Paola, we were in Colombia when she was doing her undergrad in music. By the way, she's a psychologist, social work, music, everything. So one of her careers, I met her at school when I was teaching in Colombia as a professor in one of the universities, and we connected, and then we lost track of each other, and then we reconnected like a year and a half ago with this project. I found her on the internet, and I texted her, and she said, you got me, I'm happy with that. With Dr. Josh Rodriguez, he was one of the first people at Cal Baptist University where I work now. I remember in the hall that he told me in Spanish, welcome to CBU family. And that was nice to see, probably the only Latino faculty in that moment, that I knew in the School of Music of my lovely CBU, the School of Performing Arts. So since then, we start talking about these ideas having some coffee, and I really wanted to play some of his music. With Jorge Salazar, who is now in Denver and he couldn't come, he was my conducting teacher.
Okay.
He's a conductor, pianist, composer, and when he won, I think it was the Cincinnati choir competition, and I heard his composition, I talked to him and I said I really wanted to write something, and he's an immigrant himself. And Jorge Sosa, I hope to don't take too long, but we haven't met in person. We only met in Zoom. I play
Zoom counts.
Yes. We met because one of his pieces that I'm going to world premiere today was originally written for saxophone and piano, and I premiered that in the US at USC in 2018 with a saxophone player, and he found the recording. He emailed me through the email of my YouTube account, and I thought he was going to sue me. He said, I'm Jorge Sosa, because I tried to find him, and there is another Mexican Jorge Sosa, the composer as well, but it wasn't him, he's Cuban. And thanks God he didn't sue me, so I'm here. And, but also, I asked him if he could write a piano version to premiere here with Piano Spheres as well.
The composer who also has the premiere today, Jorge Salazar, he sent a little audio clip just introducing himself and his piece. So maybe we could just take a moment and listen to that.
Oh, that's nice. Nice.
He sounds really nice.
Yeah.
I like his voice.
That's just, he's being a
Nice
teaser.
voice, yeah.
First, I want to say thanks to Andres, my dear friend. I want to say thanks to Piano Spheres for this project, for trusting me, for inviting me to write music. I have to say that this has been a wonderful exercise in my life. Making this reflection about my experience as an immigrant and expressing this through music. So, thanks so much. I'm deeply grateful with you. My suite of 5 characteristic Colombian dances connects with the intention of expressing my experience as an immigrant in the United States. During these 6 years since I left my country, I have experienced countless emotions that I wanted to capture in a suite using my music. The first piece, Danza, expresses the joy of finding a new horizon, of facing a new adventure full of excitement for what is to come and happy for the new opportunities that are opening up. This piece is imbued with energy and vitality, symbolizing the enthusiasm and hope that accompany the first steps in a foreign territory. Next comes the Poro, which enters a new reality in which, despite preserving the joy of the new experience, it encounters the daily routine and the new battles that represent the challenges. This dance maintains a constant rhythm, symbolizing the daily struggle and efforts to adapt and prosper in a new culture without losing one's own essence. The pasillo and the alabao are together in a lament, a longing, the missing of what was left behind and now feels far away. These pieces evoke nostalgia and the pain of separation, remembering the roots and what has been left behind. The alabao, in particular, reveals an acceptance and a continuation, a reconciliation with the past and the present reality, allowing one to move forward with dignity and strength. The joropo is an explosion of character, a resolution to face the new with determination. This dance is strength and resilience, going through 1,000 emotions, but always with determination to face destiny despite its vicissitudes. The joropo symbolizes adaptability, the ability to overcome obstacles, and the courage to build a new life in a different environment. This suite not only represents my personal journey as an immigrant, but is also a tribute to the cultural richness of Colombia, a country whose music is as diverse and vibrant as its people. Through these melodies and rhythms, I wanted to capture the essence of my experience, share my story, and at the same time, pay homage to my roots.
Before I move over to the two of you, is there anything you would like to say about his works that you'll be playing? Favorite moments to listen for, or I know we were talking a little bit about synesthesia the other day, where different senses get mixed up, and this one mixes them up, which is very exciting. Do you want to just say a few things about that and maybe your approach to his piece?
From the technical way is very idiomatic pianistically, as he's a pianist, but he's bringing a lot of his sense of humor. Oh, actually, all four composers, they have a good humor, but different humor, and they bring it in their pieces. You'll see that in the recital. It's hard not to laugh when you're playing, and yes. But from Salazar, I will say he combines a lot of flavors from Colombia. Every dance represents also the dishes from that region of Colombia. So you will find like the third movement has a lot of coffee, of course. The second movement, the porro, has a very spicy sauce that you use on the top of the empanada. And in my synesthesia taste as well, the last movement is kind of very bright gray with a green, and brings the idea of a big dish in Colombia that you eat in the countryside, full of celebration around and kids dancing. That's wonderful.
So after the concert, we're going to have to go eat because
I'm already getting hungry. I'm already feeling hungry.
So there are three little short pieces, and it's Jorge's piece first, and then the next large world premiere is Josh's. So I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about your work, and also since this is a theme about immigration, and how does that play into your work?
So for me, my piece is called Luz entre aguas, and that translates to light amidst the waters. And for me, my starting point was I wanted to find an image that set a mood, and then somehow that could lead the piece. And so I settled on this image of light in the middle of water, and I didn't think of it as being necessarily positive or negative. I just felt like this image was associated with the immigrant experience in many ways. So you have light among the water, the Statue of Liberty, right, that received so many people. Light amongst the water, you have people trying to cross a river, right? You have lights looking for those people who are crossing the river. So it's just an image that is, I felt, a part of that experience, right? And I tried to write something that was evocative of the different facets of that image. And for me, being second generation, my father's from Colombia, and then my mother is from Southern Illinois, English, Irish, German. And so it's sort of, for me, I was reflecting on these stories that have shaped me. But it's not a journey that I specifically started, you might say. My father was the one who started that journey with my mother. And so I think one of the things you'll see is that each of these pieces is very different, and we're dealing with the topic of immigration from a different perspective. So it's going to be very multifaceted, I think, that way.
You have dances also in your piece, and for you, what do those dances signify?
Thanks for bringing that up. I think, so dances, there's something very defiant about the act of dancing, and for me, it's a kind of ultimate expression of life. It's a movement. It's a vibration. And so I was very inspired by the music of Alberto Ginastera, an Argentine composer, who often ended his music with a big dance. So it's an affirmation of life and of hope, regardless of what comes, what came before it. Now, in my case, though, my dance comes at the beginning. And so it's a kind of act of defiance and of hope that then is followed by a slower movement that is about homesickness. Because you set out wanting to accomplish something, but then the looking back. And so you have that that is being dealt with in the piece.
Paola, how about your piece and its relation to immigration specifically?
So this piece is called, we choose the title, Journey of Immigrants. So when Andres came with the idea, he told me, I really want etudes for piano, which is, specific techniques that you do to train your fingers and become a better pianist. So when we were talking about, his experience here, my experience here, we realized that we were connecting with a very interesting theme. And migration is natural. Migration is something that you do in life in many ways. You migrate from baby to teenager to adult to everything, right? Or you migrate from university, from home to a new state university. But this is like a more intense immigration because you actually deciding or have to move from one place to the next one. So since I have another backgrounds in other fields, I was like, okay, so let's go and search. So I did a deep review, literacy review, references, and I found very interesting cases, study cases. So I called Andres and said, Andres, we have the idea. And I sent him this diagram with the stages. And we decided that the stages will be a good structure for piano development in terms of education, but also in terms of the process. And we started exploring the process together, and it was really fun because every time I'm sending new pieces to him, and he's like, oh wow, this is really great, and we are back and forward in this WhatsApp for a long, long time. It took us a year to complete the project. And finally, so what is the name? I don't know. So Andres Journey of Immigrants, okay, Journey of Immigrants. So it has been really exciting because it helped us to understand our own experience, but we also started doing experiments. So Andres paid 2 friends and other people, and we start hearing their testimonials and their, experience with the music, and it was like, wow. And it's really reaffirming to find what I found in my life is to say the unspeakable through music, and that was the perfect place to do it. So thank you. That was a great idea. And thank you to Pianospheres because that has been, something that we asked and just okay, go ahead, yes.
Yeah. You mentioned with immigration, that it's not just the physical movement from location to location, because both of you touch on that, and I think Jorge's piece did too. But also, the idea of stages and nostalgia and other things like that come into play. It reminded me of sort of I can't remember how many stages there are of grief, but that thing of working through someone's death, or in this case, it is a death of a sort, leaving a place. So would you talk a little bit more about the different kinds of emotions that we'll be hearing in your works?
Sure. For me, movement and saying goodbye to friends was actually a key part of the reason why I turned to music, because I was born in Córdoba in Argentina, but left as a baby. I spent my childhood in Guatemala, and then at 12 years old, left Guatemala, moved to northern Mexico, completely different culture, said goodbye to all my friends, and it really was then that I turned to music. And so it was because of this sensing, maybe for the first time in a really deep way, what loss meant and what change really meant. And every country in Latin America and even regions within each country are just vastly different. And so I was experiencing something new. I tell people that I went from something that was a very multicolored kind of experience in Guatemala to northern Mexico, which is much more of a sepia desert kind of feel. And so it was different colors, different food, different accent. That was the first time I realized I had an accent, because I had kind of a mix of Guatemala and Colombia to my Spanish. And so I kind of had to deal with that, trying to like drop it and pick up the northern Mexico accent to my Spanish if I didn't want to attract attention, right? And so that kind of stopping and starting, and then eventually moving here to the United States, and then starting again and building community is a part of that. So you kind of go. I went through several of these phases, I think, several times, and they're out of order too. It's I don't think anyone experiences these kinds of journeys in the same way.
And before you, one question, you also now live in Michigan.
So I've been in just in Chicago.
Chicago,
Yes, Chicago.
Detroit.
Yes, in
Chicago,
Michigan,
Detroit.
exactly.
So then, how do you describe Chicago compared with northern Mexico?
Well, Chicago is very cold, right? Especially right now with the polar vortex. I'm getting a little bit of sunshine right now, which is great. Monterrey, Mexico is a lot more like Los Angeles. I remember having spent some time coming to study music in the United States, and when I moved to Los Angeles, I felt like this feels more like home than other places I've been in, because it is similar.
Paola.
So for me, when we start reading and learning about it, normally exactly, it's very similar. It's like a grieving process, but also depending on how you decide to do it. Like sometimes you decide to do it. Like in my case, fortunately in the city where I grew up, they didn't have music composition, so I had to move to the next city, which was Bogota. I'm from Bogota, Syracuse, very cold.
Yes.
And after that, moved to Michigan, and it's true. I mean, you move from one state to the next one, and it's a completely different environment. And when we put together the 5 etudes, the first one was always like, when you go to a place and it's really exciting and everything looks nice, you're like, yes, that's awesome. And later you start realizing like kind of homesick, and you start like, oh my God, I miss this or I miss that. We were talking today like about food, and like, oh my God, don't make me stop.
Yeah.
Right? And later, the third movement, I think, was one of the hardest that people has to face. Wherever you go, in any other place, you don't exist. You don't have your childhood friends, you don't have your family, you are just by yourself, right? And you have to build, and build really hard, especially when you are building your paperwork, your legal paperwork, your friends. You have to relearn a lot of stuff and abandon a lot of stuff that you have from ideas. And after that, when you finally made it, and that's one of the hardest ethics for Andres, like, after that you feel like at home, and it's really nice, and it's a cozy place, it's pajama day. And finally, the fun part is the 5th movement actually was recent, right, like in November, because I went to Colombia. And when you go there, and my family is whispering to my family members, she's speaking English. And like, hey, I can hear you. And they see you as a foreigner, and you're like, okay. And the fun part is like you realize that you don't know how to make phone calls anymore, how to take public transportation. And like, oh my gosh, I feel like a foreigner as well. But you have the best of both worlds. So in the 5th movement, I try to create that through the rhythm. Like you're happy in both worlds, you miss both of them. But it's true, I mean, you go through the cycles over and over depending on what is happening. And that was a fun place, you know, to explore and put in music.
All right, Andres, before we send you back, could you tell us, maybe specifically about Josh's and Paola's pieces, what are some of your favorite moments that we should listen for? I thought that would be an easy question.
Maybe in Rodriguez's piece, Luz Entre Aguas, there is one moment in the last movement that is happening a canon of 4 voices. Extremely difficult to perform, as is extremely difficult to adjust as an immigrant. So I think he intentionally, and also by the providence of God, he wrote it very complex. But it has to be like that.
Got it.
Because it reminds me my own journey. Those moments that life happens in canon. And there are 4 voices at the same time that you need to manage. And sometimes they go out of your control and you need help from above. From Paola, probably the 4th movement. With my wife, we had this beautiful experience of inviting a family from Afghanistan to our home. Because of their religion and culture, it's not easy to accept invitations. And they accepted. And they came to have dinner with us. And I thought, why not playing for them? Paola's entrance. Back then, we didn't have number 5. Thanks God we didn't have it yet. So I played the first 4, but the 4th one, Veronika, which is acceptance. Make her one of them, a girl, 23 years old. She got mad and she said to me, I still cannot accept what is happening. So she got mad with the piece, not with the composer, not with me, but because of her, she felt it was herself there.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's when I start thinking that Rodriguez, Salazar, Sosa, and Marquez pieces are touching situations that make the invisible visible. One of the hardest things for an immigrant is to feel invisible, for the system, for the society, for the academics. And to be able to see her visible, that music brought her to that. It was truly a blessing. Yeah, so that for movement in her piece.
Okay, great.
Yes.
All right. So at 7:30, I'm sending you back. We still have
Thank
10
you.
minutes, and then I'll take you.
Thank you.
We're looking forward if anyone has any questions, we would take a few of your questions to either of these composers.
No, everybody at the same time.
I am very excited and appreciative for you, all of you. Thank you for bringing this feeling of living that in music is a beautiful expression and congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Did you have a question or just
I just want to
Oh, lovely. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, great. All right. Anybody else have a question? Yes, Mark.
As you've moved many times from place to place, how has that affected your musical inner life and what you want to put on the page for other people to play here?
Did everyone hear that? Yes. Okay, good.
That's a great question. My brief answer would be that I feel like there's a little piece of me that I take with me from that culture when I move to the next one. And, I'm shaped by what I'm hearing on the radio, what I'm hearing outside my window. I mean, I remember, at night, these serenatas in Mexico where you'd have a mariachi show up in the middle of the night. And so these tunes kind of work their way into your dreams, into your life. And then, that is a contrast to the marimba music in Guatemala that I used to hear in restaurants. And so I feel like for me, it's just, whenever I compose, I try to bring together all the things that I love. Whether it's something from a different genre of music, maybe it's an experience, maybe it's a sound or color or a smell that I'm trying to somehow replicate or bring together. And I try to encourage my students to do the same, because I think if you do that, if you're really trying to find organic ways to radiate the things you love, it's interesting for you as a creative. It's at least one way to aim for honesty in the music, and there's something about keeping it fresh that way, because you're sort of remembering your first love, and you're staying close to the things you love, trying to bring that together. And maybe some people say that the result is you end up with some sort of artistic voice, right, at the end of the day. So that's what it's been for me. That kind of, it becomes a little more multicultural. At least that's what it's been for me.
For me, it has been the same. I think one of the beauty of become multicultural is that you see the life in a different way. You see more activity, you learn more about it. Like, you know, I'm always trying to ask people from other countries, tell me what is your favorite music? And I try to hear it and try to understand why they like it so much. And even if I don't like it at some point, I listen until I get it. But it's the beauty, because it's like having a treasure. You just have these gems, and you start bringing your treasure box, and you just travel with them all over the place. And the world becomes really beautiful. I mean, I have friends all over the planet, and it's beautiful to know how they are, their food. I remember when they teach me how to eat things that you will not put in your mouth, and things like that. So I think it's just, you become richer, blessed, and life becomes like a dance. And that's the thing I really like about that. And musically, that comes out. I think you don't think it consciously sometimes, it just comes out. And sometimes my friends say, hey, you have the salsa cloud, and they're like, oops.
With your music, you know, there's this, the last few years there has been a lot of discussion about appropriation by people who create in various arts and you know, appropriating someone else's culture. And so that makes you think about, are there any influences you find that, not necessarily in these works, but in things that you've done, that you sit back and wonder, am I appropriating someone else's thing? Which I would do anyway, because, you know, everything can be an influence personally.
Sure.
But, I mean, do you ever find that in any of your music?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have an example? If you would care to share.
Yeah, I mean, with the etudes, at some point, we have our piano teachers. And part of the process was to set the music to them, and they start like, oh yeah, that sounds like so-and-so, or a little bit that so-and-so. Anyway, you carry that with you. Your muscle memory also carries that with you. So at some point that just filters out, and maybe it's conscious or not. Like I just told you the example, the clave salsa music is from the city I grew up. It's not intentionally, and it's in this piano piece. And I just discovered it was there because a conductor friend told me, Paola, you have the clave salsa, and this measure is like, holy, okay. Nothing to do, it just came out.
Yeah. I do think that sometimes, yeah, we're not aware of all the influences that are coming through. If I'm dealing with a specific bit of music that maybe, you know, has indigenous roots, or is something that's not maybe something that's further from my immediate culture, what I've done is and I haven't really done this very much, but if I do, I find myself in a situation where I want to understand the culture, the environment, and I want to give myself to understanding and to loving it, and making sure that I acknowledge that in the program. So if there's something that I'm quoting, you know, that you know, so I think acknowledgement, you know, it's important to recognize the shoulders that we, you know, are building our work on. And so, in my case, for example, I recently set an indigenous poem by a kind of Solomonic figure from the Aztec, you know, an Aztec empire. And so I spent time learning about Nahuatl and this language and this culture. And even though I was just setting the text, and I wasn't doing anything musically to try to imitate, you know, their music, but that enriched me. I mean, I came out of that experience really enriched, like what you were saying. But that's been my approach.
All right. Anybody else have a question? Yes, please.
You stated that your social work and psychology, your passion, influences your music. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so basically, I study psychology in my home country. I work in a lot of fields, all kind of demographics, become a social worker here in the States. And I think for me, that connection with the human being is very key for my music. So I really love collaboration. It's just for me a nourish process. Like if normally sometimes musicians ask for your music and say, okay, write the music and send it to me 7 months later, and they just play it, right? For me, I've been finding, the universe took me to a way that I've been finding projects where I actually need to connect with the human being and learn from them. So I have, for example, many years ago, this choir contacted me in Ohio, and Cincinnati Women Choir, and they told me we had this beautiful poem from these Native Americans, and the writer actually is alive. She gave me permissions for the rights, and I started collaborating with her and learning about her culture, her native background, her goal, her poem, because it's a very powerful poem. It's basically empowering Native Americans to speak up. So I want to be very respectful, and that's when the psychology and the training as a clinical psychologist come in. Like, I want to interview them in a nice way, ask the right questions, be respectful, asking like, how do you want to be called? Tell me, what is your name? Explaining everything. So the understanding who are they. And for me, that has been a beautiful tool because it allows me to really grasp the idea of what they want and be a better composers for them. And sometimes when I work with other people, I just ask, imagine that I'm a waitress, just tell me what do you want. I hope that answered your question.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh, yes.
So I heard Andres say that he wanted to do a concert of contemporary music, but he had to study other composers because that's what's required in conservatory. So I remember listening or reading this article by a guitarist, Gigi, who was basically facing this with her students who wanted to play contemporary music and they couldn't because the guitar repertoire is difficult. So, is this changing? What do you think about that? Is that still going on? I mean, I know this is a big question, but I just would like to hear more about why the conservatories stick with not allowing contemporary pieces.
I don't think they don't allow. I think it might be certain professors or certain schools, and knowing traditional repertoire I think is helpful. But I think a lot of places are very open to it, and it also depends on the student. It's like food. But why don't you answer this question?
Yeah, what I was thinking as you were asking this question, it's a great question. I think maybe the short answer is I'd like to think that it is changing, and I think a concert like this is a part of that, right? Is sort of, so if this is sustained, these kinds of events, then the for lack of a better word, the canon of classical music will be expanded, and it has been. I mean, it's this huge canvas on which a lot of people can communicate. So. But I think it is up to each professor as to what kind of music they learned when they were younger and the work that they're willing to do to learn, other musics. And then, of course, yes, there is sort of technique that is worked into a lot of the great pieces that we still play that you would need as a musician. So it's a complicated question. But I'm seeing some changes, and I hope if that's sustained, then we'll see something positive.
I mean, if you even look at something as sort of mundane as a music theory book, 30 years apart, the first few chapters are now much shorter, and there are additions doing, 20th, 21st century music extended techniques. So it is changing. It might not change as fast as some people would like, but I think it depends sort of where you are in what school, if you're talking about academia and stuff like that, and what studio you're in as well.
Something interesting that is also happening is normally we deal with dead composers, and people is just starting to see that we are alive. So I think what is happening is we have the standards in the universities that they consider is the standard to be well trained. But I think what is happening right now, and I see it little by little, is that the live composers start to expose themselves more and asking for more and sharing more. And also it's a new generation of musicians that are actually asking for different music. If they can reach the same pattern or the same path, at least if they can reach it with something different, that will be fun. Like, for example, Andres didn't tell me. He went like, oh, I give your music to one of my students. Like, oh, okay, cool. Now she's gonna play it in her recital, which is really good because, you know, she's learning the same through a different new music. But it just takes time because it's like, you know, meeting someone new. You need time to really know that person and see that person really fit the criteria. And at some point, hopefully, any of these works is gonna become part of the curriculum for any school. But for now, I think it's just a slow process, like everything in life, just changing slowly, but at least it's happening.
And I think what I've seen so far that I really like is people who are just, maybe they can't affect an entire region or entire school, but they can choose what they want to do and teach in their classroom. And I remember I've learned so much from my professors, but I remember one professor that I had who I met up with years later after I graduated, and I said, oh man, I'm struggling to find time to do class prep and to compose. And I remember this person saying, oh yeah, if it's between class prep and composing's always going to win. And I sort of thought about that, and for some reason it bothered me, and I realized, oh, that's why we never studied. We basically studied in your classes the music you studied when you were in school. And so I realized, okay, I'm not going to do that. As much as I would love to go back to working on this piece that I'm going to work on for the sake of the next generation, I'm going to spend some time preparing for class and doing the hard work of digging into archives and visiting websites and finding lesser known voices and being an advocate, champion for these voices. Yeah.
Well, speaking of advocacy, please thank these two amazing composers, and we can't wait to hear them.